In a forest in the remote southwest of Ethiopia, these people have gathered to see television for the first time. They're the Morsi, and the program they're going to watch is about their own lives. Over the past decade, we've made 3 films with the Morsi. Now they're seeing something of these films and retracing their journey of the past 10 years. The Morsi's extraordinary story over those years has never reached the world's headlines about Ethiopia's terrible famine. But since our first film in 1974, these people have been driven by the worst drought and famine in living memory to an increasing contact with the outside world. For them, it has been part of a long journey in search of cool ground. Tonight, and for the next 2 evenings, we're following the Morsi on that journey through the films we've made with them. Tonight's film looks at the Morsi in 1974. 11 years ago, they had barely heard of Ethiopia and had almost no contact with the outside world. For the Morsi, it was a time of war. Men of the Morsi returning from war. "20 miles to the north of here, these men have been in a skirmish with a party of raiders. A Morsi has been killed and one of the enemy shot dead by a Morsi youth. It's the boy's first killing, but these deaths are just 2 more to add to dozens of others on both sides over the past 3 years. Now, raids and skirmishes are occurring almost daily in the war between the Morsi and their northern neighbors, the Bodhi. This film is about a society at war, but it's not just about rifles and bullets. There's no need to come to a remote part of Africa to find them. What did interest us about the Morsi is the way they decide what to do about problems like war. The Morsi reach all their important decisions in open public debate. This film is a detailed record of how the Morsi made their vital decisions at a time of crisis. This is Morsi country, one of the most isolated places in Africa, cut off from the rest of Ethiopia by a barrier of mountains and by one of Africa's great rivers, the Omo. In 1974, Emperor Haile Selassie's Kingdom of Ethiopia was being overturned by revolution. But the momentous events were quite unable to reach the Morsi. far away on the southwestern edge of the country. They had their own crisis. The 5,000 Morsi occupy the land between the Omo and the mountains. To the north is the territory of their neighbors, the Bodhi, and in 1974, the two groups were at war, a war to settle the boundary between them. The key place was the river Mara. To reach the Morsi, our filming expedition had to trek south for 40 miles through Bodhi territory. But long before we could reach Mara, we were involved in the war. The Bodhi elders of Gura come to talk. With us was an English anthropologist, David Turton. Over the past 3 years, Turton has seen at first hand how disastrous the war is for both sides.
It's disastrous mainly because people get killed, but also because neither the Morsi nor the Bodhi can utilize the grazing potential of their country to the full while they're on a war footing. And the past 3 years, furthermore, has seen the worst drought and famine for both groups in living memory. There has been a drastic reduction in population since I was last here in 1970.
Like the Morsi, the Bodhi carry rifles left behind by Italian troops in the 1930s, virtually the only imports from the outside world. David Turton has been studying the Morsi since 1968. But Turton has often visited the Bodhi, and he's no stranger to the elders of Gura. Today, however, it's not Turton who the Bodhi really want to talk to. They're more interested in another visitor, a Morsi called Uli Chagi. Uli Chagi is returning to Morsi country after being in Addis Ababa with David Turton.
Uli Chagi has been cast in the role of messenger. He's probably slightly unnerved by this situation, being a lone Morsi in the heart of Bodhi territory, but he's clearly determined to make use of the situation to do what he can to bring the war to an end. I'm sure that when we do reach Mara, Uli Chagi will announce the news he has brought with him from the Bodhi in a debate.
The main Bodhi spokesman is a man called Golam Minta. He speaks the Morsi language fluently, but he's a tough negotiator and has already predicted a 7-year war. And Golam Minta has unwelcome news for Uli Chagi to take back to the Morsi. The only way the war can end, he says, would be for the Morsi to withdraw from the river Mara and a place called Kuduma. He claims that both places really belong to the Bodhi.
Now tomorrow now kese karani na keli rena nganga na katakte na berko te hang ogna yoga nganga uliwa okuye tono ko yogbalo iri betitono butomue ini betitono butomue ini beye nangni tono ko yogbalo.
But despite Uli Chagi's diplomatic response, the Bodhi peace proposals are tough.
At Gura, we first came across what will undoubtedly be the chief obstacle to an early end of the fighting. That is, the Bodhi insistence that Mara and Kuduma, this cultivation area on the Omo, legally belong to them. I say legally because the Morsi have, in practice, been occupying this territory for at least the last 20 years. What I think we're seeing in this war is the build-up to the legal ratification of what is in fact the present boundary between these two groups.
For the Morsi here at Mara, the war has overturned the normal patterns of their lives. It's harvest time now, and there should be a great coming together of men and women who've spent the dry season months apart. the men miles away with the cattle in search of grazing, while the women cultivate the sorghum crop. But because of the war, the Morsi cattle have been moved miles south of here for safety, and the people are scattered. It's 20 years since the last war between the Bodhi and Morsi. But in that time, there has been a steady drift northwards by the Morsi to these cultivation areas at Mara.
At the end of the last Morsi-Bodhi war, the Morsi held their peacemaking ceremony 20 miles south of Mara. So their aim this time is to hold the next peacemaking ceremony here at Mara itself.
Sheltering from the early afternoon heat with some of the men who stayed at Mara is Rabbi Thela. Rabbi Thela is a jalabai, an influential man. He's not particularly rich in cattle or ferocious in war, but when he speaks in debates, people listen. In a debate, any man can stand up and say what he feels should be done. But when a jalabai like Rabbi Thela speaks, people say his words stick. There will soon be a debate here at Mara, so that people can decide what to do about the proposals Uli Chagi has brought from the Bodhi. Now, Rabbi Thela describes how peace will be made with the Bodhi when the time comes.
Aba ku orkel tabay nga na komon li hoina tharanye kini si bihu na ku boro chole la ku chole na chole te challe kiti bu mori nya hu na ku do buna hu e tu ngo wish na ro no kawai no se nga na li boro ko ngai ko ka tan oro yana binan nisu kiti bu kutel hu mori nya hu ku do buna hu usha gargara anganga.
These men of Mara are coming to a debate. Under a shade tree near the river, they will spend the next hour in disciplined discussion of the Bodhi peace proposals brought here by Uli Chagi. Debates like this are the means by which the Morsi reach all the important decisions affecting their society. In normal times, the Morsi debate about everything, from where to move their cows to when to plant their crops. Over the month which followed the debate at Mara, it was possible to film a detailed record of how the Morsi continued to debate and reach decisions about the most urgent problems confronting their society now, the peace and the war. In the debate at Mara, the first speaker is to be Uli Chagi. To his waiting audience, he brings the word from the Bodhi. Like all the speakers in Morsi debate, Uli Chagi uses a special language, a rich and complex variation of everyday speech, full of old words. A translation can only hint at the total meaning.
Lo hinlona kanyanito oli ba oyo inyo ani kini hang na o se ke na beranga garasonga I marai I kurumai ba na matanay no ya yo go lebita nga.
decisions are being made, but it's not quite as simple and straightforward as that might appear. One of the things that's going on is that news is being communicated. This is a medium of public information in a society without radio and television and newspapers. An efficient way of spreading a new piece of information is to gather people together so that they all get the same message at the same time. Secondly, these debates are a means for the handing down of oral tradition, handing down of information about how certain problems were dealt with in the past from one generation to the next. And in this way, oral tradition is kept alive in a society, again, which doesn't have written records. Debates are an occasion for mobilizing action, getting people to do something together. It's not so much a matter of deciding from a number of possible proposals for action, which would be the best on a cost-benefit basis. It's a matter of getting maximum public support for one of those proposals. I think we see going on here this process common to all political decision-making of mobilizing collective action behind one particular policy. And that is done by connecting what is almost certainly a proposal that could be argued against by some people, connecting that with something that can't be argued against, with some ultimate value, some taken-for-granted value, which cannot publicly be contradicted. I think that it's probably true that the Morsi have very few totally novel situations to cope with, and therefore the chances are that even before a debate begins, the conclusion that will be reached is pretty well known. It makes it even clearer that a very important function of the debate is not so much deciding what to do as maximizing support for a particular line of action.
As the men of Mara begin to debate Uli Chagi's news, it's soon clear that they're not impressed by the Bodhi peace proposals or by Golom Minta's claim to Mara. The Morsi have no formal leaders, but there are limitations to the apparent democracy. Only men past their mid-20s may speak. Women watch from a distance without a voice. But debating is seen as a vital activity for the whole society.
Debating for the Morsi is not something which you do only when there's a particular problem. In their opinion, it's something which should be going on all the time, almost whether there's a matter to discuss or not. You might even say a community that debates together stays together. This is how they see it.
An influential man like the Jalabai Rabithella usually chooses to speak towards the end of a debate. Jalabai is a term the Morsi use to refer to certain individuals who are credited with influence in the society through their ability to speak well in debates. These men are generally elders, that is, they belong to an age grade which gives them a
position of seniority in the society. What I think is happening is that a number of men speak, a sense of the meeting emerges, and then, towards the end of the meeting, one or two acknowledged jalabai speak in a way that sums up the sense of the meeting and, most important of all, connects it with ultimate Morsi values, and that puts the lid on it, with the result that the jalabai who have spoken towards the end tend to get credited with having actually made the decision. Whereas in fact what they've done is they've summed up the sense of the meeting and they've given it the stamp of their authority and they've legitimized it. It's a position they have to achieve by means of their own personal qualities and energies. One might call it informal leadership or leadership by discussion.
After almost an hour and 7 speeches, the last speaker is on his feet. Some kind of a decision is forming, but not by any clearly visible process.
There's no voting because they have time to go on talking until some kind of consensus, some kind of sense of the meeting emerges. They have time, that is, to go on talking so that they can avoid the split which inevitably takes place when you ask people to vote. So one could say that they reach a consensus through a long drawn-out process of talking. So all the speakers in this debate were adamant that Mara and Kuduma were Morsi territory. And this is why the last speaker said that if a peacemaking ceremony was to be held, it would be held here at Mara. It's not so much, in other words, when, but where peace is made that matters.
25 miles south of Mara, Uli Chagi is on familiar ground. His route now is along a ridge overlooking the valley of the River Omo. Between him and the river is 7 miles of dense and impassable bush belt. The Morsi don't have any permanent villages, but in clearings hacked out of the fringes of the bush belt are a series of temporary cultivation sites. At a place called Mardo, one of the cultivation areas is being harvested by Uli Chagi's family. But even down here, in what the Morsi call the stomach of their country, there's no escaping the war with the Bodhi. Uli Chagi's cows, which should be close to this cultivation area now, are still many miles to the south with the rest of the Morsi cattle. And even inside the family compound, the war has left its mark. 3 of Uli Chagi's houses have abruptly disappeared. Along a concealed path behind the compound, one of Uli Chagi's 2 wives shows what has happened to the missing houses.
The houses have been dismantled and removed into the bush, and that's been done entirely as a response to the recent incidents in which 2 Morsi young men have been shot dead and 1 Morsi young man has been badly wounded. These incidents took place both south and north of here, but certainly close enough to cause the people here to become extremely worried about the possibility of further Bodhi attacks.
After days of mounting tension since the debate at Mara, suddenly there's grim news from the south. A messenger has arrived from the handful of people who are down in the south with the Morsi cattle. His news is that the Bodhi have managed to pass right through Morsi country to attack the cattle compounds. 2 herd boys have been killed. So the earlier decision to move the cows as far away from the Bodhi as possible has failed. A new plan is needed urgently. Only an hour after hearing the news from the south, the men of Moisoi gather for a debate. One of the men waiting under the shade tree is the local priest, Komarakora.
Komarakora is essentially a religious leader. That is, he's the means by which the community can, as it were, plug itself into supernatural power. He mediates between the natural world and the supernatural world. He does have a political role, but it's as a symbolic head, as a focus around which the community can unite. As a repository of supernatural power, he is also treated with respect, bordering on fear. His presence within the community is looked upon as vital to its well-being, especially during particularly dangerous times. The priest is expected to officiate 2 or 3 times a year at fairly large-scale ritual events, the purpose of which is to protect the community from various kinds of threats and hazards, disease, drought, crop pests, cattle raiders.
For the priest and his people at Moisoi, it's soon apparent that the peace ideas discussed at Mara will have little place here. After the news from the south, all the speakers now have one urgent decision to consider. Where should the cattle be moved to protect them from further Bodhi attacks?
Ahiri orayanga nana bekariye na du sene anga na lipo kele yo na kulugu ba mata ma el bay dirnga kili kitone ba bola nga na yo ko boy sapo nga gal pol ko girango na boy kon tire wani tu mana errasu erra ke erro kwana kwara berra nga ko ture nga ijo nga bana nga kulia luhanga gerebi achahuri menga reseri na ketai ko ni ko liwa ya bekale tai yo bainga hanna mena ko tire tolon berri ko kum na kauna loki ko do el chabi nga na kemezinga na ngani kutulung na bi na ko na ngani abi he ma do e ka ta abi he ka wele ye ka to.
The next speaker scornfully rejects the idea of leaving the cattle in the south.
No look or na bakela nanga mere ringa libai tun ne nyana huli ibana uje se bai na ginu ngasi he kala ku na ke jizu anga hanga mere kare chaun ke mezi du hinke ke jina ku surani nga me an tumuri an kaga lo ku nge lo mi na se ke zeta bio na ka kala mi du ba huli abe mo zeta na matemeri na kisi yo nja bu
I can't call it by or I get down a cool, Nakotok Janga, warranty. Bana Buchalinga about the Pinauri. A bit doba, Naquaki Holly. Nga ba ku wal bali nga ketanga lo liki tunga biono garta nga nga kala kuruna na mogi nga menga ka kutungiyo anyana tini nga meditation allo ketenga jini yo tini ke dike ko boho teheba.
Speaking last of all, the priest avoids expressing any view of his own. Instead, he carefully sums up for the audience the balance of opinions expressed by earlier speakers.
When the priest speaks in a public meeting, it is, in my experience, always in a conventional and ritual way, to be a sort of mouthpiece or to represent the solidarity of the group, as he did on this occasion.
To emphasize his call for solidarity, the priest now addresses his audience by an ancient word for the Morsi, tamai.
Kauna kele henelo hinya mahuli abioi kifike inge tenga na tenga kumukte hebo idone bainga kumukta dai na bikutumbo idone kifini anga kifini naruno ka kalamre bibo hola nakulu utunya.
Yeah, me sel. Sebai sel.
Under the ridge at Mardo, near Ulichagi's cultivation settlement, boys begin work on a defensive cattle compound. The Morsi cattle are back after 3 months in the south. They'll now be guarded from Bodhi attack in the defensive compounds. For the Morsi, the reunion with their cattle is a major event which gives back meaning and shape to the whole society.
It's obvious that the Morsi think of themselves as cattle-keeping people. You've only got to spend a short time there to realize that, to Morsi men, cattle are the be-all and end-all. So much so that if a young man shows a lack of interest in cattle, he's regarded as something of a dropout. Young men should be fanatics about cattle.
Although the Morsi get milk and blood from their cattle and eat them when they die, they're not kept for beef. In fact, the sorghum crop makes up about 3/4 of the Morsi diet. Cattle are much more important in other ways.
Cattle are used to express, represent, symbolize social relationships, the most important of which is marriage. A man can't marry without handing over cattle to his wife's people. A good bride price these days would probably be in the low 20s. There's no great development of artistic work, either in the construction of houses or the making of everyday objects, or in the decoration of their own bodies. Perhaps one could say that it's from their cattle that they seem to get their deepest aesthetic satisfaction. They will sit and look at their cattle, comparing the different patterns, discussing the relative merits of different horn shapes. They actually train the horns to aesthetically pleasing shapes.
Now that the people and the cattle are together, it's important to try and get some idea of the future. Some Morsi, like Biobume, have special skill in reading entrails. The entrails are laid out like a map of Morsi country, with the mountains down one side. From the position of blood spots, called stones by the Morsi, the direction of enemy raids can be seen in advance. But today the stones are more personal. This goat's entrails say that an elder brother of the priest's family is going to fall ill. Biobume is unhappy with the reading, and he asks to have a look at the entrails of a second goat, which has also been killed this morning. He hopes they'll provide clearer news. The second set of entrails are as worrying as the first. If they'd been more favorable, the stomach contents of one of the goats would have been used to purify the compounds after the recent deaths. But everyone agrees today's intestines are too disturbing for that. On the ridge, overlooking the defensive compounds, men are gathering for a very special reason. These men are from Waran, a few miles to the south. Soon there'll be many more from the whole northern area of Morsi country. They're coming here for the ceremony of spearing the priest.
When the priest officiates at these large-scale rituals held at moments of particular danger for the community, in this case from their current enemies, the Bodhi, there takes place this rather paradoxical sequence of events in which the congregation approach the priest in a threatening manner as though they needed to defend themselves against him.
The ritual attack on the priest's compound begins.
It does seem paradoxical that the person who is considered to guarantee by his presence the well-being of the community should become a focus of this ritual aggression. Perhaps this illustrates the fact that the priest is a source of power which can work for the benefit of the community, but he is also a source of power that might equally well work against the community.
By now, the men from Mara are approaching the priest's compound. The Mara people also send an advance party in a ritual attack on the priest. The smoke from the fire attracts the attention of God, from whom the priest gets his power.
The priest is potentially dangerous because he's a channel for power, which is potentially dangerous.
The debate which follows immediately after the ceremony is in some ways a continuation of the ritual. Decisions are less important now. It's to be an occasion for people to unify around the priest. The first speaker in this debate is to be Karatialu. He has been in the south with the cattle for the past 3 months, and he's to set one of the main themes of the debate when he attacks the people who stayed behind in the cultivation areas instead of helping to guard the cattle or attack the Bodhi. Karatialu accuses them of sticking with their sorghum crop, which he calls their cow with no legs, while he risked death in the south. Biobume, the expert in telling the future, raises another common debating theme, the scorn of the older generation for the failings of the young men.
Kawara sapanga inga yana na gorra kunio. O dono ige to long puto.
One of the men who stayed at Mara is goaded into a protest at Biabume's attack. By singing his personal war song, the man asserts his fighting spirit.
Kola be gela logo na kola min tini be sigana logo sabo ala holi balo di dona na kinar raman kola be na o kerra ko ya de so dina ke da no ramana dori ala done balo na done ngame be sik to lo nya na lo ki ko ngani ne garsumbi anu inga banana
After Biabume has handed over to the next speaker, several others continue the bitter attack on the younger generation. They're repeatedly accused of not paying attention to the elders and learning from their store of wisdom. But as the audience anticipated, the most extended and bitter attack on the failings of the young comes from the jalabai, mitatu.
Mitatu appears to have achieved a preeminence in this northern part of Morsi country, which no other jalabai comes close to rivaling. The Morsi describes speakers as being tall or taller than others, and there's no doubt that Mitatu is regarded at the moment as the tallest jalabai.
Finally, the priest rises to speak. Immediately, he begins the job of healing and unifying after the tensions and disagreements exposed in the debate. It will lead at the end of his speech to the surrounding of the priest in a mass demonstration of unity.
Nahale. Gure ini akiran. Hale piuru goreng. Gure ngadoli. Ayo baritik, bersi kita.
A year later, in 1975, the war came to an end. Here at Mara, the first peacemaking ceremony was held when Rabithela sacrificed a white ox. So the Morsi occupation of Mara was finally confirmed. But David Turton sees the Morsi's success as part of a bigger story.
What was the Morsi-Bodhi war really all about? To say that the Morsi won gives the wrong impression. They didn't win a fight for territory. They'd already made that advance peacefully.
The Bodhi lands to the north of Morsi country offer a better living than their more arid territory. Turton believes this is the key to their uneasy relationship and to that larger theme.
If one stands back and looks at this relationship over a wider time span, I think one can get some idea of what exactly is going on. The Morsi, I believe, are moving northwards into Bodhi territory, into land which is more favorable both for agriculture and for herding, because better watered, there are more permanent rivers. They are moving, in other words, into higher land towards the Ethiopian highlands. Now, they are not pushing the Bodhi back by force of arms. They move north, they drift north, seeking, as the Morsi put it, cool ground.
Tomorrow night's film looks at the Morsi in 1982 and at how they dominate a people called the Kwegu. And it records the stirrings of great change for the Morsi.